Hello friends, and welcome to listening to the Verde. My name is Max Wilson. I'm a program manager with Sustaining Flows at Friends of the Verde River. This program will inspire, engage, and inform you about everything that makes the Verde River healthy, water habitat, and community. I'm here today with Jeni O'Callahan, owner of Rancho Brisas in Camp Verde, Arizona, and president of the board of directors at Friends of the Verde River, and Chip Norton, owner of Sinagua Malt and board member of Friends of the Verde River. Thanks both of you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Now, Jeni, I'd like to start with you today. You know, the river is a long and diverse place. You know, we have giant mountains on one side, all the way down to the deserts of Phoenix. But I think most people would love to hear a more personal story. And I was wondering if you could reach way back in the memory banks and tell me about your very first memory on the river.
Sure. My first memory on the river where I knew it was the river, because my self has always been involved with water through, I can't remember not being in water or related to it somehow. My first memory of the river is right after my grandfather bought Tres Brisas in 1963. And we were riding horses in the bottomlands of the river. And there were these cathedral-like cottonwoods over us and birds, you know, and I was 5 years old, so I don't know what kind of birds. Birds and water and that smell, that fresh smell you get from the river. And I just remember this beauty. This is what I want to keep.
So you grew up around the river then?
I grew up in Phoenix, but I grew up around water, even though we're in the middle of a desert.
For sure. And can you tell us a little bit more about Rancho Tres Brisas?
Yeah, Tres Brisas, as I said, my grandfather bought it in 1963, and he knew the value of water. His developments in Phoenix and California were little gardens when you went into those developments, and he knew the value of water in the desert. And so Tres Brisas became a place for our family to go, to recreate, to enjoy that water, not only being part of our lives and part of our recreation, but also feeding cattle, watering cattle, causing great beauty, and being the valuable undeveloped land.
And what has it meant for you to see that water continue to be here from your childhood all the way forward to your children and grandchildren now today?
It's amazing. I'm very happy that it continues and then that the Verde flows at our home. We are on the river. And I am happy that all three of our children and our grandchild will be able to enjoy it. We are using best practices for water delivery. We have very happy beef that have lived on Tres Brisas all their lives and are very yummy.
Well, I want to come back to those best practices a little bit later in the program, but before we do, Chip, you know, you and I have known each other for a few years now. I've heard a lot of great stories about crazy places all over the U.S. from you, amazing rivers and creeks that you've been on. But you've chosen to spend a lot of your life working on the Verde itself. And I was wondering if you could tell us why the Verde? Why this river out of all the rivers that you could possibly work to save?
Sure. Well, in the early 90s, my wife and I were both living and working in Phoenix. And then we would travel to great places, mountains and rivers, and you know, really get a good taste of things, and you know, a lot of continents. And we decided that we wanted to move to a small town, and either had to be in the mountains or next to a river. And at the time I was doing a project, and my project manager was a member of a family that was a pioneer family in Camp Verde. And he said, you know, my uncle is selling some farmland down along the river in Camp Verde. You might want to go look at it. And so we went and looked at the Verde, and I had some history with the Verde because my family's from Payson, and we used to have family picnics on the East Verde River and all of the tributaries up there. So I really loved that. And Kathy, my wife, went down there, looked at the river and said, this is the place. But I was like, no, we have to do due diligence. We have to look at a lot of different places, which she suffered through. And then we bought the place, and about 2 weeks later, we did a 1-week canoe trip down through the wild and scenic. And, you know, I don't have her instincts for knowing this was the place, but it was definitely the place. Since then, I've probably done at least 30 trips down through the wild and scenic, multi-day trips. And then, you know, I had other rivers to compare it to, and it is very unique and special, especially the biodiversity and just the life here. Like, there are a lot of rivers that may be considered more scenic, but I've never been anywhere except perhaps Central America where there were as many living things all just in this special corridor. And you know, I still, it just awes me to get in the middle of that.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that first trip? I'd love to know what it was like the first time you went down and saw that area.
Well, one thing is we were in a divorce boat, you know, husband and wife in a canoe, tandem canoe.
What could go wrong?
I don't recommend that to anybody, but I mean, there was so much wildlife. You know, we were seeing javelina, bear, you know, birds, bald eagles, birds of prey, and we would go, as Jeni described, we'd go through these corridors, like just tunnels of life with, you know, we did it in the spring, the flows were up, there were exciting rapids, so there was adrenaline, and, you know, just birds everywhere. There was stuff in the brush everywhere. It just felt like the African queen going down through there. And I can tell you that if you spend 4 or 5 nights or more on the river, you start off just talking, downloading, and at the end, you're doing less talking and more listening, which is why I love the theme for these interviews you're doing, because then when you start listening and then you start dreaming about water, and it's just a good place to spend that time.
I'd like you to hold that thought for just one moment, because we do have to take a break. In a moment, we'll be back to talk about some of the threats facing this river and what we're all doing to try to save it. So join us on the other end. This has been Listening to the Verde. Welcome back. This is Listening to the Verde. My name is Max Wilson. I'm a program manager at Friends of the Verde River, and I'm joined here today with Jeni O'Callahan and Chip Norton. Chip, I'd like to pick up where we were before the break. You were mentioning these amazing corridors of green and the unbelievable diversity of life and how it kind of burrowed its way into your mind a little bit and your dreams. Can you tell us a little bit, though? Let me back up. We've seen through our watershed report card that flows in the river are declining, and they're declining pretty rapidly. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you see as the threats to the river over the long term here are?
Well, I think there has been a trend of, if you put it in terms of supply and demand, you know, it's a hard-working river, and there are a lot of demands for that water, both, you know, here in the Verde Valley for agriculture and downstream, and also the aquifers feed the river, have a lot of demand on them. And I think most people will agree right now that there is a challenge in having the supply and the demand balance out, which certainly affects river flows. But now we have, and I think anyone that's experienced the weather this summer, we have an additional challenge, and that's climate change, because, you know, here we went through an entire summer and, you know, we didn't have a monsoon. This time of year, the flows are typically up, and they really haven't come up much because we haven't had monsoon flows to, you know, bump that up. So I think that if you take the demand for water from humans, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing that there's that demand, but it's certainly a challenge. But then you put on top of that, you know, reductions in precipitation, especially reductions in snowpack that recharge the aquifers that feed the river. That's definitely a threat to river flow.
Absolutely, and that was, I think, one of the main challenges we had in making the watershed report card was this decision on, like, what do we do about climate?
Right.
How do we think about climate as an issue? And I think the conclusion that the folks we were working with there came to was, we want to have a river whether the climate cooperates or not. Right. This is an important enough thing. So, Jeni, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit now about some of the things that you guys are doing to reduce that demand that Chip was talking about.
Mm-hmm. One of the big demands in the Verde Valley is groundwater pumping. And at our ranch, we do use groundwater to irrigate our fields, therefore to feed our cattle. And there's several different ways to water ground like that. When you're watering 14 acres, it's not just a little sprinkler. Indeed. Yeah. We used to do flooded irrigation, which I thought was reasonably sufficient, and I found that sprinkler irrigation actually is more efficient, more water goes back to the river, and it even makes the fields more even, mm-hmm. so that there's more grass and other stuff for the cattle to have. So we've started sprinkler irrigation with a grant from Nature Conservancy, mm-hmm. and it's really pretty also. And it kind of acts like a swamp cooler, so it cools down the land.
So just to make sure I got that straight, you guys, through this change to sprinkler irrigation, are using less water but getting more consistent grass, getting the same amount of feed?
Yes, how crazy is that?
That's great. Those are the kind of solutions we love to hear about.
Yeah, a happy solution.
Chip, I was wondering, towards that same vein, you have been working for the last few years on Sinagua Malt, which is this really innovative solution to keeping farmers engaged in farming, opening up agricultural markets, while also trying to reduce water use and keep the river flowing. Can you talk our audience through some of the basics of that program in just the simplest way you can describe it?
Okay, basically it is converting crops, crop conversion. And, you know, two of the bigger summer crops in the Verde Valley with farmers were alfalfa and corn. So we did a lot of research on grains that might, you know, yield the same profit or more to the farmer, but use substantially less water, you know, during the irrigation season or throughout the year. And anyway, malting barley actually turned out to be a great fit for two reasons. One, it uses significantly less water than corn or alfalfa. So overall, it will reduce your water demand and yet be more profitable to the farmer. But there's also a seasonal shift there, because the farmer plants malting barley in January, harvests in June, doesn't irrigate those fields in the summer. So it's taking water when there is water in the river, and during the summer months when demand's at the highest and precipitation's the lowest, you're keeping that water in the river. So it turns out you can take, just even though Sinagua Malt is a small business, which we will be expanding over time, you know, just in the month of June with less than 100 acres of field planted in barley, you'll save a minimum of 61 million gallons that month.
That's unbelievable.
So it really makes a difference in river flows. And I just like it because, you know, the nonprofit world does so many good things, but I felt, well, there's room to bring in, you know, business markets as well, and just everything you can bring to bear to address the threats that we talked about is important.
Absolutely, and I think, Jeni, that same question goes to you then. Has having the river been around, has that been an asset for your business? Has that been something that has helped you grow?
Yeah, no farms, no food.
We do need food.
And so, you know, almost everything we eat even, is affected by water in some way or another. So yeah, it's helped our business grow and helped the quality of our beef continue to be a very high quality.
Great. So I wonder now, we've talked a little bit about the past, the threats that are facing the river, what it was like when we were all growing up. What does the river look like in 20 years? Let's start with you, Jeni.
Well, my glass is always half full, so the glass, the river will be at least where it is today. There will be more and more people out there becoming more aware of river-friendly living and ways to indeed give back to the river through knowledge, through good pumping or use of water, through recognizing that there's cool birds and other stuff out there.
And do you see locally people getting more engaged with the river over time? It sounds like you're alluding to that.
Yeah, definitely. Friends has started on a very small scale so far, a river-friendly living. And we have a sign outside at our at the ranch on the river that says river-friendly living. I can't remember exactly what it says. Anyway, and people have already started asking about that and how they become a river-friendly place. So they're wanting to know, they're wanting the steps to take care of the river.
Great. So I think I'll echo that question back over to you now, Chip. What does the river look like in 20 years?
Well, my vision is that it looks like it does today. I don't think we're in a position to bump flows up with the climate being the way it is right now and the population increasing. But I think that there are just a lot of good indicators that we can maintain the base flows we have. And you know, the engagement of the community in the last 15 years, I mean, the trajectory is, it's a steep curve. It's really amazing. Because 10 years ago, when I got involved with this, it was not that popular with a lot of elected officials, and that's just changed entirely.
So to speak on that a little bit more, what was it like 10 years ago?
Well, I remember Chip Davis, who was a former supervisor, talking to me about they had a meeting about removing the sand and gravel plants from the riverbed, and it was in Cottonwood. And he said they had to have all the police there. A lot of people showed up with their guns, and it was not a place for, you know, mature conversation among adults. It was a hot issue, and that's just changed completely. Great. So I think there's been so much progress made. I think Friends has done a great job and other conservation groups, but I think, you know, I got to hand it to a lot of the community leaders and elected officials that they have really stepped up. The leadership of the Yavapai Apache Nation is inspirational when, you know, when they're talking about preserving the river. There's just a lot of voices speaking in unison right now. And there better be, because this is going to be a very, very hard project, and everybody needs to be committed to it.
So, Jeni, what do you think makes it hard? To Chip's point, it's a hard project. What are the things that get in the way of us getting to this vision in 20 years?
The hardest thing is changing people's minds. You know, Arizona is a nice place to live. The Verde Valley is even nicer than Phoenix because it's not as hot. And so people want to be up here. But we need to ensure that those people who move up here know that there's a river and appreciate the river and continue to do things that help the river continue to flow. like using sprinkler irrigation in my case, or perhaps just collecting water to water your flowers out front.
Absolutely. And I wonder about that knowing there's a river here component, because I know growing up in Phoenix, when people talked about the Verde, it was sometimes they didn't say the nicest things about it. It was hard to get to, it was hard to access. Do you think that we've moved the needle far enough on that, or do we need to continue to push further? How about we'll throw that to you first, Chip.
Well, yeah, we do need to move the needle, but I think that that's an incremental thing. I think if we can do in the next decade, make the progress we've made in the last decade, I'm hopeful. Again, I'm just very impressed with what community leaders are doing. It's good forward-thinking leadership in the Verde Valley. Yeah.
Great. So changing gears here just a little bit as we're getting close to the end, I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about your involvement just directly with Friends, how you ended up here and why this is an issue you choose to spend your time and energy on. Jeni just recently became our board president.
Yay!
Yay! Exactly. And we're all very happy for that. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit, why is Friends in particular the type of organization that you want to work with?
I moved to the Verde Valley officially in 2008, and at that time, my dad and mom were in a lawsuit with Salt River Project. And so my dad died that year.
Oh, no.
So I inherited this, what? And going through that process, I came to know people connected to water in the Verde Valley. And I have to admit, Kim Shonick was one of them. And I started asking her when we were going through various water issues on our properties, what else could I do? And she suggested Friends of the Verde River. And at the time I was like, I don't know if I want to be that busy. Here I am.
We got you here today.
and I really was inspired by the way that Friends of the Verde collaborates and does not give it just one way, that we look at all kinds of solutions. We critically think about the river and about the community and how it can all connect and be better.
And Chip, I think your leadership over the years is a big part of what got Friends to that point. We have this tagline, right? Working collaboratively for a healthy Verde River. Let's break that down into some pieces. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to you to work collaboratively?
Well, I think it is, to take an older term, is working with partners. And in my life, my short life to date, when I saw things getting done, it was done with teamwork. And I know we tend to tout, strong leadership, and it's definitely important for someone to get all these people together. But that kind of teamwork got things done. And so, my goal was just to get these people together. And they didn't necessarily they just needed a catalyst, an agent of change to get them together. And then they would just come up with the greatest ideas. And they just got a ton of work done on the ground with habitat restoration and working on policy change. And that's what then affected a lot of the elected officials, is that this group of respected community leaders was coming in and they were developing, wildlife areas, recreation areas, and they were adding assets on the ground, and elected officials like to see that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And so if you're thinking about those partnerships, which I really like that word as well, what are the one or two things that came out of those early days that you're the most proud of?
Well, I'm actually proud of what other people did. And I'm just proud of the people that stepped up and worked so hard, like to improve wildlife habitat on the Verde River, and then just, to start thinking about how we could work with the local community to conserve water, to do things like what Jeni's family has done and a lot of other folks is, what can we do to make sure that the river keeps flowing? Because it's in our best interest to keep the river flowing. And I'm just proud to know those people. I'm proud to know Jeni and you, these folks that are working so hard to do this. So.
Well, we are running out of time here, but Jeni, I think it'd be really nice to give you the final word here today. Why should people care about this river?
It's a ribbon of life in a desert. We live here in this desert, and there is life up on the high ground that's related to that river, but there's this wonderful ribbon that promotes birds, it promotes farms, it promotes homes, and we need to keep it that way so we can continue a great lifestyle.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think that's a wonderful note to end on today. This has been Listening to the Verde. I was joined today by Jeni O'Callahan, owner of Rancho Tres Brisas in Camp Verde, Arizona. Chip Norton, owner of Sinagua Malt in Camp Verde, Arizona. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Listening to the Verde is brought to you by Friends of the Verde River. Please visit verderiver.org/listening for more videos and resources.